Why would a face once replayed hundreds of times on cable television, a scene that constantly appears on lists of the most memorable moments of the 1980s, choose to step away from the spotlight while Hollywood was still ready to offer more leading roles? With Phoebe Cates, public memory does not hold on to an entire career. It holds on to a single image and lets the life that followed drift outside the frame, where very few people kept watching. That moment has been replayed, quoted, and parodied for decades, as if it were the sum of who she was. Meanwhile, everything that came after faded into the background. A few decisions to withdraw, a few quiet adjustments, and a life whose story was never continued. Public memory keeps her like a ready-made clip, and then never presses play on the next scene. And behind the frozen icon lies a chain of turns no one had prepared for. A body once trained for ballet, a stage dream cut short by injury, and a new path that opened not from ambition, but from the need to adapt. When she entered film, Phoebe Cates did not simply step into roles. She stepped into a system where the young female body became central to both storytelling and public memory. Before she was captured in a single image, there was a person trained to stand on stage in a very different way. And it is from there that the real story begins. Phoebe Cates was born in 1963 in New York, into a family where stage lights and countdowns before airtime were familiar sounds. Her father, Joseph Cates, was associated with live television programs such as The $64,000 Question, where studios stayed brightly lit for hours. Audience seats were packed, and countdown clocks hung just behind the wings. On those evenings, life moved in units of broadcast minutes, in a host stepping onto the mark at the exact cue, in hand signals from a director at the back of the studio. Her uncle, Gilbert Cates, was known for large stages where award ceremonies were assembled with thick printed scripts, camera diagrams, and performer cue sheets timed down to the minute. In that same family environment, meals were often cut short by a rushed phone call, a rehearsal schedule change, or an urgent request to be at the theater, as if life offstage always had the right to intrude on private moments. In that household, conversations did not revolve around roles or dreams of fame, but around backstage matters. Who was stuck in traffic? Who had not yet reached makeup? Which segment needed rewriting? Which lighting cue was wrong? For Phoebe, art first appeared as a workspace, where corridors, waiting rooms, and scheduling boards covered in notes were as important as the main stage. Alongside that world of Broadway and television was another space, coming from her mother, born in Shanghai into a Chinese-Filipino family. Her mother's childhood stories were not tied to American studios, but to memories of migration, of changing languages, cities, and rhythms of life. In their New York home, those stories existed alongside rehearsal and broadcast schedules, creating a family background that did not belong to just one world. From her father's side, Phoebe inherited Russian Jewish roots, with a history of settlement in Manhattan and the memory of a community accustomed to rebuilding life in new lands. The two branches of her family carried two different narrative rhythms, one of American stage and national television, the other of cross-border journeys and learning how to stand firm in new environments. Growing up among overlapping cultural layers, Phoebe became accustomed to existing in between, not entirely belonging to a single world, yet not outside any of them. That sense of identity formed early and stayed with her through her childhood. Phoebe studied at the Professional Children's School, then at Juilliard. Pursuing arts education was not a sudden turn, but more like continuing along a path that had been familiar since childhood. Practice rooms, syllabi, and repeated drills created a very concrete rhythm of life. Art was a structure, not something imagined from afar. Ballet was the first language Phoebe's body learned in order to exist in the world of art. At the School of American Ballet, practices took place in the same mirrored room on the same wooden floor, with the same familiar footprints worn into the surface. The body was trained to align properly, to hold balance through fatigue, to continue through pain. For a girl raised among stages and backstage corridors, ballet was not an experiment. It was a way to define herself. A knee injury at 14 arrived like a dividing line. There was no final performance, only days when practice could no longer continue as before, movements that would no longer hold, and the realization that the chosen path no longer opened forward. A body that had been a central instrument suddenly became a limitation. Ballet left before there could be a final show. What remained was a knee and a training schedule crossed out. The void was not named right away. It appeared only as days of starting over in another language. In that space, acting emerged as another path within the same system, a way to remain in the artistic world after the old road had closed. A body once trained to speak through movement now had to learn to speak through stillness and the gaze before a camera. The transition happened quietly, changing the body's language, changing modes of presence, changing the rhythm of existence within a familiar world. The traces of ballet did not disappear. They followed Phoebe into her first steps, like an underlying layer silently shaping how she entered roles. Not as someone beginning from a dream, but as someone continuing after a fracture. In the late 1970s, Phoebe entered the world of teen modeling as a practical solution rather than an idealized beginning. Her face quickly appeared in magazines for teenagers, with 4 covers of 17, becoming a familiar image at newsstands and in the bedrooms of American girls. The smile, the hair, and the style were repeated according to the same formula, enough to create recognition, and also enough to create a sense of repetition. Photo shoots followed a steady schedule. Change outfits, adjust lighting, hold the smile at the right angle, step into the pre-marked position. Within that system, Phoebe learned very quickly how to become an image, but she also quickly recognized the limits of existing mainly as a surface to be consumed. In later interviews, she spoke candidly about doing the job for money, not for passion. That repetition made modeling a narrow space, sufficient to build recognition, but not enough for her to breathe as a working artist. Turning to acting, therefore, was not a dramatic break, but a search, a form that allowed changes in rhythm, shifts in role, and a way to place a face inside a story, rather than only on a cover page. Acting became a way to leave the repetition of the fashion lens without leaving the system. A different role within the same structure. A space where image was tied to dialogue, context, and situation. For Phoebe, this was not a romantic redirection, but a necessary adjustment to continue existing in the world she had grown up in. In 1982, Phoebe's first leading role came with Paradise, when she was only 17. The film was shot as a coming-of-age story set in a desert landscape, with the familiar structure of teenagers in the wilderness. For a young performer just leaving the modeling world, this was a major leap, a lead role, and heavy screen time and the chance to be seen as a genuine film presence. But Paradise also carried scenes that placed a 17-year-old actor in a position of having to learn about boundaries too early. The shooting days were not only about learning how to stand before a camera, but about learning how the body could become part of storytelling, in a space where decision-making power did not rest with the young performer. Years later, Phoebe spoke openly about her discomfort with the film. She admitted regretting the choice and was particularly uneasy with how post-production was handled, including the use of a body double and the way information was communicated, which made her feel she no longer had control over the frame. The sense of boundaries being crossed did not exist only on screen, but in how her image was handled after filming ended. After the film was completed, Phoebe kept her distance from Paradise. There was no promotional campaign tied to her face, no appearances to speak about the project that had brought her into film. That distance was never formally declared, but it was clearly present. A quiet choice in response to a film that had recorded images she no longer felt belonged to her. And what began with Paradise did not end on the last day of shooting. The way scenes were edited, the way images were finished and released, placed Phoebe very early in a professional reality. Once a frame is recorded, it moves beyond the control of the person in front of the camera. At 17, she had to learn how to live alongside a version of herself fixed on film, an image that continued to circulate, to be watched again, to be referenced, while the real person had already moved into a different rhythm. The distance Phoebe maintained from the film was not only distance from a project, it was distance from an image that had left her hands, existing independently within the system's circulation. From this point, awareness of image ownership became an underlying tension. The body, the face, and the moment could be separated from the person who had created them. Then Fast Times at Ridgemont High pushed Phoebe's career into the center of popular culture at a speed that was almost uncontrollable. The poolside scene, constructed with precise music cues and camera angles, quickly moved beyond the character Linda Barrett to become an image replayed, quoted, and widely circulated on cable television, in cultural commentary, and in public memory. From that moment on, the frame began to exist independently, like an icon detached from the story that created it. Fame, therefore, did not spread across the full performance, but narrowed around a fragment. Fast Times was a major commercial success, and gradually came to be seen as a defining slice of early 1980s American youth. The film's inclusion in the U.S. Library of Congress for its cultural value only made that frame more solid. Phoebe became recognized as a face of a generation, but that recognition came from a single moment. In the script, Linda Barrett was not a one-dimensional image. The character carried innocence, fragility, and had to learn to face her own choices. On set, this role came to Phoebe in a working environment that felt more comfortable than Paradise, allowing her to better sense creative rhythm and collaboration. But once the film left theaters, the focus of attention quickly narrowed again around the image that had become iconic. Lists, articles, and the way media referenced Phoebe often returned to the same frame. The body, the appearance, and that moment became the anchor of public recognition. It reappeared as clips, rankings, and habitual references. The next step carried an attempt at repositioning. With Private School, 1983, Phoebe sought to expand her professional space through elements not based solely on image. In this film, she did not only stand before the camera, but also contributed vocals to the soundtrack, placing her presence into another language, one where sound, rhythm, and voice shared the weight that had long rested almost entirely on appearance. On set, this was a small but deliberate shift, a face connected to a singing voice, a presence read not only through sight, but once the film entered the cycles of promotion and media coverage, the axis of attention turned back to what had already been stamped in place. Images, headlines, and the way her name was invoked continued to center Phoebe's appearance, causing efforts to broaden her professional identity to be obscured within the same orbit of recognition. Alongside film, in 1984, Phoebe entered long-form television with Lace, a space that allowed a character to exist longer than a single moment and required performance to carry more emotional layers. The role of Lily placed her in a different structure, dramatic, sharp-edged, demanding control of internal rhythm rather than reliance on surface image. The character was built through process, glances shifting from scene to scene, a voice carrying bitterness, and pauses where emotion was not fully spoken. One line in Lace quickly moved beyond the script to become a television marker. The question about the mother delivered like a cut. Phoebe's delivery did not rely on display, but on compression. The voice held steady, the gaze unflinching. A pause long enough for the bitterness to rise on its own. When TV Guide later honored it as the greatest line in television history, that moment belonged not only to the words, but to the way Phoebe controlled the emotional tempo of the entire scene. On set, this type of role required her to sustain a psychological state across multiple episodes, allowing the character to change over time rather than exist in a single instant. Eyes, voice, and silence became primary tools. This was where performance began to carry weight, independent of image, where the body was no longer the absolute center of how a character was read. In the television memory of the decade, Lace exists as a space where Phoebe was allowed to be present through character depth, not through a single iconic frame, but through an extended series of acting choices where tension accumulated over time. It was another way of standing within the same system. Not loud, not explosive, but clear enough to show she could be seen through a different language. After Lace, Phoebe's presence returned to cinema within a completely different structure. The event film. Gremlins, 1984, produced by Steven Spielberg, was released as a summer hit, with dense screenings, wide promotional campaigns, and a commercial lifespan extending beyond theaters. With global box office earnings of roughly $150 million, the film quickly became part of the rhythm of popular culture, where characters, imagery, and atmosphere spread into VHS tapes, television broadcasts, and merchandise. In Gremlins, Phoebe's presence was placed within a cinematic rhythm that did not allow emotion to stand still. Scenes moved rapidly from one to another, the tone shifting from humor to chaos in just a few cuts. Kate Beringer was not built as a focal point, but as part of continuous motion, appearing, reacting, then being swept along by the film's structure. The Christmas monologue appears as a rare opening in that structure. The film's pace slows for a few dozen seconds. No swelling music, no rapid cuts. Phoebe holds her voice steady, without seeking a climax. The scene passes quickly within the film's whole, but leaves a different trace. A brief stillness in a system designed not to stop. Gremlins carried Phoebe's face further. Theaters, VHS, holiday reruns, and the long life cycle of a franchise. Yet when people mentioned her, what was named first was still not Kate Beringer. In the years that followed, Phoebe's career drifted into a region with less defined shape. Projects continued, but no longer carried the same sense of strong definition as before. Date with an Angel, 1987, placed her in a light comedic fantasy space, where image still functioned as an attraction, but did not open much depth to redefine her presence. With Bright Lights, Big City, 1988, Phoebe's image shifted away from the familiar teen space into a more exhausted and fractured urban world. It was one of the rare times she appeared within an adult rhythm of life, where emotion was no longer wrapped in innocence or surface desire. Yet in public memory, and this shift did not produce a new image strong enough to replace the old frame. Shag, 1988, continued to show a desire to move beyond a single icon position. Here, Phoebe did not stand alone, but blended into a female ensemble, sharing space, rhythm, and narrative weight. That choice softened the role of a central face, but at the same time blurred the chance for Phoebe to create a personal mark sharp enough to stand out. Heart of Dixie, 1989, appeared amid an American cinema leaning toward historical memory and social transition. Phoebe's role flowed within that current as part of the whole, not constructed to become a guiding axis. In the narrow gap between her earlier teen image and adult female roles with stronger narrative authority, roles still came, work continued, but no character carried enough force to create a new turning point in how Phoebe was perceived. Her presence did not disappear. Projects continued to arrive, but each role appeared as a quiet effort to carve more space within a frame that had already been built. There was no clear pivot, only successive attempts, where the desire to expand identity had to move alongside a cultural memory always ready to pull the image back to its original point. When Gremlins 2. The new batch was released in 1990, Phoebe's return unfolded within a structure that was already familiar. The film did not carry the feeling of a new beginning, but of a cycle already set in motion. The franchise already had its audience. The promotional rhythm already had its path. Her face entered that machinery as part of an operating system, ensuring visibility, but not opening a new space in which her image could be read differently. In the sequel, Kate Beringer still existed within the same noisy world, where rapid editing and eccentric elements continued to hold the center. The film's structure did not require the character to pause long enough to accumulate new depth. Phoebe was present, reacting, moving with the film's pace, a stable presence inside a franchise that already had its own trajectory. By this point, the life cycle of Gremlins no longer existed only in theaters. It lived on in television, home video, reruns, and a cultural memory reinforced over years. Phoebe's continued association with that cycle ensured the familiarity of her face, but at the same time clarified something. The center of public memory about Phoebe had been locked in very early, and each return to the franchise only thickened that loop. Her presence was maintained, and the space for redefinition grew narrower. After the franchise cycle was consolidated, Phoebe's career entered another state. Not a sudden disappearance, but a shift in rhythm. From the center of the system toward its periphery. Projects still appeared, but no longer carried the pressure of becoming a new axis of memory. At this stage, Phoebe's presence was no longer designed to produce the next iconic image. Roles existed as continuations of the craft, maintaining rhythm, maintaining connection with the system, but not placed in positions where an image could create a new turning point in how she was seen. The change was not only in project choices, but in the intensity of presence. Phoebe began appearing less frequently in the mainstream film flow. There was no formal announcement of withdrawal. Empty spaces appeared in the schedule, and they were left there. In a system where continuity is often maintained by keeping the image constantly visible, that thinning created a very specific kind of absence. Not the absence of being excluded, but of a deliberate shift, where presence was no longer organized around maintaining a place in the central current of popular culture. Along the same line, Drop Dead Fred appeared as a rare deviation within the familiar trajectory. The character did not operate through surface appeal, but through the uncomfortable movements of memory and emotion compressed from very early on. Phoebe existed in this space with a different rhythm, slower, heavier, less reliant on instant impression. The character's moments did not try to become memorable images, but resembled cracks through which an inner life briefly surfaced. The film did not immediately create a new image of Phoebe in public memory, but it left a different marker in her professional path. The ability to stand within psychologically uneasy spaces, where characters were not built to be easily loved, easily remembered, or easily packaged. It was one of the very few times Phoebe's presence temporarily stepped outside the orbit of old memory, not through a sharp break, but through an offbeat movement as if another road had briefly opened, only to be carried away again by the familiar current. Outside the frame, a life change unfolded in parallel. Phoebe withdrew from Father of the Bride because she was pregnant, a small detail in Hollywood's production schedules, but a clear milestone in how she reorganized her axis of priorities. The rhythm of work began to be structured around a different center, where filming schedules were no longer the sole determinant of presence. Long trips, promotional cycles, and consecutive commitments gradually gave way to another life structure, where family began to occupy the central position. In 1994, Princess Caribou appeared as a quiet continuation within her professional trajectory. The film was not framed as a milestone, nor did it carry the shape of a farewell. On set, Phoebe still stepped into the frame as usual, with the same professionalism and familiar working rhythm. There was no sign that this was the last time, no sense that an ending was being prepared. Alongside the shifts in her work, another order began to occupy more space in Phoebe's life. Her marriage to Kevin Kline did not appear as a media event to be maximized, but as a separate axis, operating parallel to the world of cinema. Family gradually became another stable structure, not located within promotional schedules, not within release cycles, not directly governed by the rhythm of film sets. In that space, life was not measured by premiere dates or shooting calendars, but by private schedules, by stretches of time that did not require public appearance. This change was not announced as a symbolic choice. It unfolded in the practical workings of life, where presence before the camera was no longer the only axis organizing time and energy. For Phoebe, this was not leaving art, but placing art in a different position within the structure of life. No longer the sole center, but one part among many. This prepared the ground for a later period where the decision to stand outside the spotlight did not appear as a sudden turn, but as the natural result of a long shift, from an image fixed too early, through attempts at expansion, to a new order where public presence was no longer the condition for defining one's value of existence. Meeting Kevin Kline did not begin with a dramatic moment, but with the way Phoebe's rhythm of life began to change axis. Beside him, her career was no longer the only center around which a day was organized, not because work mattered less, but because it was no longer allowed to occupy the entire structure of life. When they married in 1989, New York remained the center of daily life. But this was not the New York of red carpets and premiere schedules. It was a New York of days divided by what needed to be done, by the spaces between shooting schedules, by evenings not tied to any public event. Important choices rarely appeared in the form of declarations. They appeared as declined schedules, a project postponed, an invitation not accepted, staying home one more day. Those decisions did not create milestones, but they accumulated into another order. Owen was born in 1991. Greta followed in 1994. From that point, time was no longer measured mainly by shooting or promotional calendars, but by very concrete milestones of young children's lives. School drop-offs and pickups, class schedules, doctor appointments, parent meetings, nights spent awake because of a lingering fever or an endless cough. Some days passed in very simple tasks: preparing medicine, taking temperatures, waiting for a child to fall back asleep, sitting still long enough to be sure a breathing spell had passed. Those moments had no climax. They left only a very real fatigue and a very clear awareness. Tomorrow would have to be organized again from the beginning. Within that structure, Phoebe's body entered another state. I'd no longer measured by the ability to stand before a camera, but by the ability to endure the repetitive rhythm of care. Presence was no longer proven through image, but through being there at the right time, in situations that could not be delegated. Alongside this shift, work began to thin out in a quiet way. Invitations still came by the system's inertia. Scripts were sent, audition schedules proposed, Short calls appeared during the day with the familiar question, "Are you available?" But the replies began to slow, not through outright refusal, but through small delays until the next day, to consider longer, to keep an open space in the calendar. The phone still rang, but it no longer determined the rhythm of the day. Life began to be organized around things that did not appear on shooting schedules. School runs, class times, evenings that needed to be fully spent at home. In this new structure, work did not disappear. It stepped back from the center. Princess Caribou in 1994 marked the last time Phoebe appeared within a familiar professional structure. After that, projects came less frequently, and her presence shifted away from the center. There was no moment of withdrawal, only a new order being established, where work no longer held the dominant place in how time was arranged. The retreat did not happen like a door slamming shut. It unfolded like a change in habits, an empty date kept open, an invitation not answered immediately, a project considered, then passed over. Gradually, absence became a stable state. In many artistic families, marriage is stretched by schedules and constant movement. Here, private life was held together by a simpler principle, prioritizing stability before image. Family did not become a story to be told. It existed as the background of daily rhythm, where a day could pass without needing to be validated by public presence. Time in that house accumulated in another way. Not through major events, but through chains of small tasks following one another. An afternoon stretched because a child was tired. A morning altered because of school schedules. A full day at home just to handle things that could not be postponed. These did not create public memory, but they created another kind of memory, the memory of staying. Within that rhythm, her career did not vanish. It moved away from the center. Projects still existed in the background, but no longer served as the axis of every decision. Time once divided according to shooting schedules was held for family. The shift did not carry the shape of dramatic sacrifice. It unfolded as a repeated chain of priorities until the new order became normal. Phoebe's image continued to circulate elsewhere, in reruns, as in cultural memory, in preserved cinematic moments. The person she is now operates on a schedule not located in media, a schedule where presence is measured by staying, not by being seen. Phoebe Cates stepped away from Hollywood with an unusual kind of imprint. Her career is not remembered through award records or long chains of honors across the years, but through the persistence of her presence in public memory. Her legacy, therefore, does not sit on statistical charts, but exists in the way a generation of viewers still recognizes that image, even though so much time has passed. There are cinematic moments strong enough to detach themselves from the context of their origin. They move beyond the story, beyond the character, and become part of the shared memory of popular culture. Phoebe Cates possesses exactly that kind of presence. An image preserved so clearly that it needs no explanation. Viewers know immediately what they are facing. It is a rare kind of power, not derived from the number of roles or the length of a career, but from the ability to touch collective memory in a direct and lasting way. That power also creates a subtle paradox. When an image becomes too familiar, the entire journey behind it tends to be compressed. Other roles, efforts to expand professional range, personal choices, all gradually recede, not because they lack value, but because they no longer sit at the center of remembrance. And popular culture favors what is easily recognizable, and a moment strong enough is often kept as representative of an entire person. Her career carries more layers than history usually recounts. There was variety, searching, steps beyond the original mold. But collective memory often chooses the shortest path to store things. Keep the most striking image, then let the rest fade with time. That is not deliberate forgetting. but the natural mechanism of how we remember. From 2005 onward, Phoebe Cates entered a new phase of life. She established herself on Madison Avenue with the boutique Blue Tree as a long-term choice, not a short-term experiment. This space was built from very specific decisions: selecting products, arranging the overall environment, maintaining a consistent aesthetic that reflects a personal way of seeing. Work happens steadily in the shop, tied to daily rhythm, where her presence is practical rather than performative. Blue Tree functions as a true workspace. There, Phoebe holds the role of owner, selector, and keeper of aesthetic rhythm. Decisions are not aimed at creating instant effect, but at sustainability, keeping the store's tone stable over time, not swept along by short-term changes in taste. This work does not stand apart from life, but becomes part of its familiar structure. The philosophy of selection at Blue Tree leans toward objects with long lives: books, home goods, gifts, handcrafted items with personal marks. They are not chosen for quick impact, but for their ability to remain in living spaces, in daily habits, in the sense of familiarity for the user. The aesthetic here does not seek climaxes, but maintains a slower visual rhythm, allowing the eye to pause and then move on. The store's operating rhythm reflects that philosophy. It does not chase seasons. It does not change dramatically to catch trends. Selection happens accumulatively, each choice placed into an existing whole rather than constantly replacing it. In this space, Phoebe does not appear as an icon, but as a craftsperson, observing, selecting, arranging, then letting the space speak for itself. Each day begins with very small gestures: opening the door, walking past the shelves, placing the gaze again on objects that stood still since yesterday. Some shipments arrive and are set aside, not displayed immediately. Phoebe looks, picks things up, then decides on placement like someone constructing a rhythm rather than filling a gap. Items chosen rarely demand long explanations. They only need to be in the right tone for the room. At this stage, Phoebe also maintains a clear distance from media life. She does not give interviews, does not return to film. Invitations to reminisce, if they come, pass by like matters that do not require immediate response. That silence is not organized as a statement, but as an operating condition, keeping life's rhythm from being pulled off balance by the need to respond to public memory. The deeper meaning of Blue Tree lies in a shift of role. For most of her film career, Phoebe existed as an image to be seen, identified, and stored in collective memory. At this stage, she moves into the position of deciding what is placed into space, what is kept, and what is left out. Instead of standing before the frame, she stands behind the space. Instead of being arranged, she is the one arranging. Blue Tree, therefore, does not retell cinematic past, nor does it directly engage with public memory. It exists as a present maintained through repeated choices, by keeping an aesthetic tone consistent over the years. It does not need a large audience. It needs consistency. Within that structure, life is organized around decisions that can be controlled, not by the level of attention received, but by how the space is kept in rhythm each day. Blue Tree does not mark the abandonment of an old world, but the establishment of another, where Phoebe Cates is no longer the center of the gaze, but the one constructing the context in which that gaze unfolds, according to her own choosing. Public appearances, therefore, happen rarely and selectively. When she appears, it is often with family or at smaller cultural events tied more to personal interest than to broad visibility. Public life is kept at a sufficient level, neither expanded nor further reduced. In this stage of deliberate stability, spotlights no longer hold the central role in daily schedules. Instead come practical, everyday choices, maintaining the workspace, preserving the chosen aesthetic, deciding when to appear and when not to. This is not withdrawal from social life, but a shift toward another form of living, where self-determination becomes the main axis and being seen is no longer the condition for feeling present. Phoebe Cates' story does not close with a fall, nor with a prolonged peak. It closes with another movement, stepping out of the rhythm of consumption. While her image continues to circulate, the real person has chosen a trajectory that no longer revolves around being seen. Not to deny the past, but to set limits on how the past continues to occupy the present. In a culture built on the repetition of images, stepping away from the center is not natural. It requires a kind of choice few dare to make. Refusing to remain framed within a single moment, refusing to let public memory continue to determine private rhythm. There, Phoebe does not become a story about being swept away by fame, but about deliberately placing herself outside its cycle. The question left behind does not point to her past, but to how we understand success. Is success to be seen forever? Or can success also be the right to step away when one no longer wishes to be consumed as an image? Phoebe Cates continues to exist in collective memory through a single moment. The real person has chosen to live at another pace. An icon preserved on screen. A life preserved outside the frame. Two parallel lines not needing to meet.